So this fellow, his name was Odom, was arrested outside the White House last night. He's the same name that's attached to the shooting. He's the accused shooter of Pastor Tim Remington on Sunday in Coeur d'Alene. Now, there's probably the simplest explanation to all of this is probably the correct one, but there are still some people who are raising some eyebrows about all of this. I'll get to it in just a moment. It's 9:44. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX at newsradio1310.com. First off, though, I want to mention my friends at High Desert Meat Processing here in Twin Falls, where they process one animal at a time. What you're going to bring in is exactly what you're going to get back. Darren Van Horn, the owner of High Desert Meat Processing in Twin Falls, he's got more than 30 years' experience in the business, and you can visit him on Facebook, and you can see the reviews of other customers, and those reviews are just glowing. And give High Desert Meat Processing a call for all of your wild game and domestic processing needs, 734-9949. High Desert Meat does in-house smoking, and nothing gets shipped out. They have specialty meats, too: kielbasa, breakfast sausage, brats, Polish dogs, hot dogs, jerky, pepperoni, salami, summer sausage, much more. USDA approved, and Darren works closely with local beef growers and their programs to ensure quality meat. 734-9949. Saturday night, Tim Remington actually prayed with Ted Cruz at a rally in Coeur d'Alene. Cruz, of course, was campaigning, made 2 stops in Idaho Saturday, on his way to a victory in the Idaho Republican primary yesterday. The following day, Tim Remington walks out of his church, and as he's approaching or getting into his car, he's shot 6 times. And the witnesses identified the shooter, and they got a plate, and the car sped away, and the fellow's name was Odom, I believe. And we were told he served in the Marine Corps, and that he may have some issues, mental issues. And then I was told in the early hours after this that police were able to at least track his whereabouts for a while, but he was last seen going south in Oregon, and then they lost the trail. So he was arrested yesterday in Washington, about 6 o'clock our time, 8 o'clock Washington time last night, throwing something over the fence on the south lawn of the White House. And, of course, Secret Service took him in and discovered quite quickly that there was a warrant out for this guy for a shooting of a pastor, accused of shooting a pastor in northern Idaho. Okay. It's highly unlikely that the shooting had anything to do with Ted Cruz and his appearance. I don't think that this guy was walking around thinking, I hate Ted Cruz. Since I can't shoot him, I will shoot anybody involved with Ted Cruz. I don't think that had anything to do with it. This is the logical explanation. Pastor Tim Remington, we are told, spent a great deal of his time working the streets in Coeur d'Alene, trying to convince people who had addiction problems to get help. And sometimes we're told he didn't always, how shall we put it? It's very dangerous work. So more than a few times he put his own safety in jeopardy because he feels this is his mission. God has commanded him to do this. You don't just go save people in wealthy, well-to-do neighborhoods. You go save people in the worst neighborhoods. You do your best to try to bring those people out of their misery and bring them to Christ. And it's believed that perhaps he and Odom had some sort of contact somewhere along the line, that it wasn't necessarily just a random shooting, and that Odom was angry with the pastor and then shot him. Okay, I drove from southern Delaware to Idaho. It took me 3 days. I could have done it in 2, but I decided to break it up a little bit. I did that in December of 2014. It was I estimated the trip. I went and I looked at a map online, and the trip was estimated at 33 hours. Now, I came down Route 80. If you're leaving Coeur d'Alene and going east, you're going down Route 90, right? Pretty much the travel would be about the same, but you might add a few more hours to that. Now, I lived 2 hours east of Washington when I left to move out here. So cut my trip down to 31 hours if I had departed Washington to come to Twin Falls. If you're going to Coeur d'Alene, I assume you're going to add even some more time to that. So you could be up to about 40 hours to drive from Coeur d'Alene to Washington. But this guy was last seen supposedly driving south through Oregon. So that's a bit of a detour. So now if he's detouring and maybe he caught Route 80 in Oregon or 84 down to 80 and made the trip then, now his trip is up to about 50 hours. So sometime from about 2 p.m. on Sunday afternoon until about 8 p.m. Eastern time last night, 6 p.m. our time on Tuesday, He makes it from there. Now, all right, you're saying, well, he got on an airplane and he flew to Washington. Okay. Number one, everyone's looking for the guy. How did he get on an airplane? He had his ID with him in Washington, so he must have had the ID with him when he left wherever he flew out of. So did he fly out of Portland? Did he fly out of California? Did he fly out of Salt Lake City? One of two things has happened here. Someone at the airport dropped the ball, which I don't think happened because it does not appear. I don't believe he would have been able to get on a flight. There was an all points bulletin out for this guy right away. And because of the situation, the pastor having met with Ted Cruz the night before, people were very serious about cracking down on this situation. Okay, so we've got all of that mentioned. Now, if he's manic, which is very possible, he could drive for 2 days perhaps without sleeping and maybe get to Washington. But doesn't it just seem so strange that, and he doesn't appear to have any beef with the President of the United States, but that a day after Cruz visits, and the pastor actually prays on stage with Cruz, the pastor is shot, and then this guy ends up 2 days later outside the White House throwing things over the fence. What are we missing in between? I know that we don't like to, promote too many conspiracies on the air here. And as I said, the logical explanation is likely the best, and that is he was manic and he just didn't know what to do after that. Or, his thought process is all jumbled and he drove from one end of the country to the other and then was wandering around the White House and then just threw some stuff over the fence. But is there something maybe perhaps a little more going on here that we're not looking at? And if you've got a thought on that or a theory of your own, 736-0300, 736-0300. Bill Colley with you this morning for about 10 more minutes on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. A couple of other things I wanted to share with you, too, before we wrapped up the program today. We had, of course, not only news in the Republican race for president last night, we had plenty of it among Democrats as well. And I'd like to get back to a little bit of that before we close the program. But first, I'll take a telephone call. And you're on the air. You're up next on KLIX.
Hello, this is Pat.
Yes, sir.
And I was curious like you. It sounded like a little something is wrong in Denmark. They haven't mentioned about finding a vehicle from out of state or anything in that area. They've never talked about how he arrived there. So did he actually do the shooting in northern Idaho or not? It doesn't make any sense.
Right. If someone had maybe snatched his car or somebody else had done it, or, I know it's fiction, but I've watched the Jason Bourne movies, and it almost has somewhat of a similar type of feel to it at this point.
It doesn't make any sense. I don't see how anybody could go from point A to point B in such a short period of time and accomplish what was supposedly he did at both areas.
My brother and one of his friends drove from a small city just south of Buffalo, New York, about an hour south of Buffalo. This was about 1985, and they drove from there to Los Angeles in 48 hours. But there were two of them, and they were switching off the driving. One would sleep in the passenger seat, the other would drive, and they'd go back and forth. So could it be done? Yes. Could it be done by one person? That's you got to stop and you've got to go to the bathroom. You've got to eat. I mean, there's so many things that go on. You got to sleep at some point. I just don't see how one person could do all of this, especially if the car was seen taking a detour west through Oregon.
Yeah, it just doesn't make how, if he was going one direction, also he ends up clear over on the other side of the country in the period of time it happened. It must be a UFO involved. Something's right. Something isn't right there because there's no way you can make that transition from that far away so quickly.
Right. And I thank you much for the call, Pat. And he's obviously, he was in the Marine Corps. He's not been out that long. He's probably in great condition. Unlike me, I had to stop on the Illinois-Iowa state line and find a place to stay the first night, and then I had to stop in Cheyenne and find another place to stay on the drive out. And then, being that I'm a little older and more cautious, when I got up the third day and was driving and it was snowing, I really slowed down because I had to come across the mountains in Wyoming. But he may have the energy where he could drive straight through. And maybe he's guzzling those power drinks as he's going along too. You're up next, and you're on the air with Bill Colley.
Yeah, I heard on the news that he flew from Boise.
So how does he get on a plane? That's the next question. If
Well,
everyone's
I'm
looking for
guessing
him.
that he probably, before any red flags went up, he was able to shoot down there, get in the airport, get on a plane, and go before whatever, before he raised any red flag.
When you're driving, though, when you leave Coeur d'Alene, the main road, generally, you got to go back through Washington State and Oregon to get to Boise, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And so that's about a 7-hour trip?
yeah. Well, and I agree that somebody missed something at the Boise airport and probably when he got off the plane in Washington, wherever he flew into there.
Yeah, because he had to
Uh,
go through a baggage check or something coming off the plane
yeah,
in D.C.
yeah. I'm just guessing that somebody missed something and he kind of did his thing before anybody knew what happened.
Well, thank you much for the call, and that sheds a little bit more light on it because the driving didn't make any sense. I, but here you go again. He's just shot someone who's involved with a presidential candidate. The following day, he shot somebody who has an affiliation with a presidential candidate, and he ends up flying to Washington, and he ends up outside the White House. Now, one more time. I mean, so if he didn't have anything against Ted Cruz, what's he doing outside the White House prowling around? We don't know the mindset. If he is indeed insane, we don't know the mindset that is likely at work. Colin Ferguson, who shot up half a dozen people and killed them on a commuter train on Long Island way back in the late 1980s. I can remember he represented himself at trial. He fired his lawyer. Well, he fired William Kunstler, not necessarily a bad thing. So he might have had a little nugget of sanity in there. But he defended himself at his own trial, and he was trying to make his pitch to the jury or to witnesses. And he would ask these questions or come up with these stories, and you'd be thinking, all right, this guy is loopy. He is just, there's his grasp of reality was just terrible. Now, he did not want to plead the insanity. He ended up taking the plea and saying that he was guilty. And, they finally found a little padded cell for him off in the state prison and put him away. And he'll likely, that'll be where he's 25 some years later. He's likely still rotting away. And, like Clouseau's boss, he's got the crayons out between his toes while he's in the straitjacket, and he's writing "Kill Clouseau" on the walls with the crayons. It just, but something's not something. This whole story, as caller said, the ball got dropped, or the other part of it is, and I know it sounds like fiction. You might ask, who is he working for? That's the only other thing that I can think of. And is it like the Manchurian Candidate? Is something going on here? And are there more of them? Again, I'm not writing novels. I'm just a regular human being that I ask a few questions sometimes, even if they do seem a little far-fetched. Before we wrap up today, and I do have to mention Rush Limbaugh will be along following the news at 10 o'clock from Fox. We'll have Sean Hannity following news at 1 o'clock this afternoon, Glenn Beck following the news at 4 o'clock today, and then Dave Ramsey tonight right here on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And God willing, if the creek don't rise, I'll get an opportunity to do this all over again tomorrow between 8 and 10 o'clock. I got to share with you, though, quickly before we wrap up, we will have a couple of warm days coming up this week, tomorrow and Friday. Temperatures likely in the 60s, and we've been reminding you you'll want to spend more time, especially if it's going to be sunny, at least partly tomorrow. More of that time, perhaps, with at least visions of the outdoors. Now, some days, even when it's nice out, though, you don't want to deal with all the bugs and the blowing sand and dust and everything else that we have here in the high desert. We recommend Dream Room Design. They can custom build you a sunroom. The benefits: you can enjoy the deck or patio without the bees, mosquitoes, the wind, the dust, blowing rain, and snow, because you can use them all year round, obviously. You have that usable space year round. Of course, you can get windows that open and close, and you can keep them closed all the time if you like, but there may be days you want to have that beautiful flow of outdoor air. Each room is customized and engineered for your specific conditions, and they specialize in building sunrooms, patio enclosures with many different styles to choose from. And Dream Room Design sunrooms can have glass or solid roofs or a combination of both, and Dream Room Design can even enclose an existing covered deck or patio, converting it into a beautiful enclosed sunroom. And just to remind you once more, that website, dreamroomdesign.com, where you go and you'll see all sorts of demonstrations, you'll see videos, and you'll see testimonials. And you know what? You'll be thinking, you need a sunroom soon too. Have a great day, everyone. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.